just a little bit about myself, and then give my fellow panelists here a chance to talk about themselves, and then we'll jump into a little bit about what we mean by creating a grain economy. I was born in a Nebraska conventional agricultural family. My family farmed row crops, did livestock, and also sold conventional agricultural inputs. And my family did everything possible for me to not stay in agriculture. They did not want me to be in agriculture. And the reason they didn't want me to be in agriculture is I was born in 1967. And if you looked at Ken's chart, and you looked at the price decline in agriculture in the 70s, there was a massive farm crisis in the 1970s, culminating about 80, 81, 82. In Nebraska, we lost 16,000 family farms in 3 years. Farmer suicides were an epidemic. No one in my community knew. Everyone knew someone who committed suicide. So my family did everything they could to get me out of ag, and they sent me to a Benedictine monastery for boarding school. Scrimped and saved, but little did they know that in 1982, my first year of high school, I would be introduced to something called organic farming by the Benedictine monks. So 35 years later, after farming and working in the nonprofit community in Port Townsend, Washington, and elsewhere, I'm at Clif. I never thought I would be working for a food company, in part because I saw food companies as part of the problem. I saw food companies as part of the extractive system that drew value from our soil, from our natural resources, from our communities, that took for shareholder gains and left very little intergenerational equity. Intergenerational equity, a $3 word that basically means they left very little for the next generation. They didn't add value to our soil, to our farm communities for the next generation. The reason I work for Clif is because it's a family and employee-owned company. And my job, I do agricultural policy, I do agricultural research investment, farmer outreach investment. I normally would work an ag supply chain job, but I don't. I work for the community team. And the reason I work for the community team is that it's our belief as a company that we as a food company have a responsibility to work with rural communities, that they are the foundation of our success as a food company, and that we must work with those companies through federal policy, through investment in innovation, infrastructure, research, to improve the well-being of those communities, to make them more economically and ecologically resilient so that we can thrive with them into the future. Now, along that path, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of interesting people. And along that path, I've been lucky enough to have a checkbook from Clif & Company, including a checkbook that said, hey, Matthew, go out and spend $10 million on endowments, endowed chairs. We want researchers to have the certainty that they will have funding year after year after year for their programs, so they can really invest in solutions that are long-term and create real solutions for farmers and their communities. So the second endowed chair that we funded was Dr. Steve Jones from the Bread Lab at Washington State University. Now, we don't really use any wheat in our products right now, but Dr. Jones is primarily known as a wheat breeder. The reason we chose to fund grain research was because we see grains as this pivot point, this cornerstone in creating regenerative economies for our soil and for our farming systems. But in order to do that, we have to add value for those systems. So I'll pause there and let Dr. Jones tell you a little bit about his work.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I wore that shirt yesterday. I almost wore it this morning, so glad I didn't. Matthew said I'm a wheat breeder. I'm housed an hour and a half north of Seattle, just south of Vancouver, BC, and if you know anything about the wheat belt, that's not in it. We're out of place, and we really embrace that notion of being out of place. We think there's tremendous value in that. So we're in a valley of 90,000 acres where we grow 80 crops. The average farm size is 100 acres. The average farm size in the U.S. is 1,000. We're highly diverse. Half the cabbage seed in the world is produced within 10 miles of my office. Second largest tulip farm is within 10 miles of my office. So we're not hobby ag. These are real growers, and we produce a lot of important crops. Our job, or my job, is to add value to the down part of the rotation of those 80 crops. If there are 80 crops in the valley, 79 and 80 are barley and wheat in terms of economic importance to the growers and interest to the growers. but they have to grow barley and wheat because they have to add organic matter back to their land. Our job then is to add a soul, a face, and a place to what normally has none, which is wheat. About 50 million acres of it. We'll hear another exception in just a moment, but basically it's all the same. And where we are, it's not the same. And where we are is out of the commodity market. I think it's a really important place for us to be, and that is out of place. But as soon as you get out of the commodity market, no longer is what you're producing predefined and predisposed to be a certain way. And that is, in wheat, the term of the condition of wheat, is white flour. So if there's 50 million acres of wheat in this country, it's all designed for white flour. To say different is to be wrong. It's designed for white flour. The first step there is that that's not the best use of our land. If we produce 100 pounds of wheat, we're only making 70 pounds of flour out of it. So that's not the best use of our land, and it's odd, right? So we work only with 100% whole wheat. And we work with 100% whole wheat because we can grab the flavor and nutrition and fiber and other things in a wheat kernel that are normally gone. But we're also looking at the best use of our land. The main use for the bran, which comes off, that 30% in our part of the state of Washington, is peat pots for pot plants. Okay? So we take that 30% of the wheat kernel, which has all the fiber. A wheat kernel has 8 to 10% fiber, white flour has 0. It has all the iron, zinc, selenium, magnesium, manganese, vitamin E, vitamin A, folic acid, all those things go into peat pots for pot plants. Okay, pot's great, that's really cool, but it's not the best use for our iron and zinc and fiber, right? White flour, if it was our main calorie source, we'd get very buried. Okay, that's not a theory, that's a fact, right? It's basically gluten and starch. Okay, why would we do that to a wheat kernel, right? Why would we take that 30% out and do something else with it? It's odd. So we work with 100% whole wheat. We do that in a way with the best chefs and bakers in the country and possibly the world at times, and make something that you would want to eat that's approachable, accessible, and affordable. And that's a mission of our lab, is make it work for the farmers first, make it yield in a sensible way, organic and conventional, bring it into the lab, find the best use for that, because now we're out of the commodity market, it's not predefined. Right? It's not going to be white flour. Not going to make a Big Mac bun. I don't care about Big Mac buns personally. It's not going to make a Twinkie. I don't care about those either personally. But what will it make, and how nutritious will it be, and who would want to eat it, and how affordable can it be? So that, in a really broad sense, is our job in the bread lab.
Hey, I'm Stevenson, and I grew up down at the south end of the Wood River Valley on my family's farm. My dad has been farming down there for about 45 years, and if it wasn't for a very recent dental procedure, he'd be on the combine right now. Instead, he's here today with us. I think my brother's on the combine. So I guess I mentioned that because it's unlike Matthew's story that my parents haven't been able to shake us. My brother and I are still here, and we're very committed to our operation. We've been primarily growing barley. And unlike Skagit, we don't have quite the diversity of ag products like beautiful Skagit. It's primarily grain. We're one of the biggest grain growing states in the country. And I had this recent realization that our processing abilities are really lacking. We don't have much of a milling opportunity in the state, nor do we have much of a malting opportunity in the state. So that's what I'm currently working on. I'm under construction with a flour mill. So hopefully we will get some clean grain milled freshly and fresh flour into our bread products in our region.
So Brett, as you're trying to develop this value add to the grain economy here, obviously you said it's a very strong grain economy, but you're trying to add this value add for yourself as a farmer and for the farmers you'll buy from. What have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles that you faced in making this opportunity a reality?
Yeah, well, first I would like to comment about the enthusiasm. I mean, there's clearly a lot of support in the community and just with our neighbors and stuff. So that's really motivating and exciting, and I think the interest is there. The hurdles that I've been encountering are largely around permitting, regulatory issues, and that's been, I think, really interesting to me because our community, our comprehensive plan is very progressive, and it talks a lot about how pro local economy and pro ag and pro local food we are. Yet you actually go to do one of these projects and get a permit for it, and you encounter a very different response. And so I'm in the process of working through this with the county. But when we talk about sort of scalable or replicable projects, that is one thing that I think others should be well aware of before they embark on something, is local regulations, in addition to National Food Safety Modernization Act.
That's great. What about agricultural challenges? So you all, your family's been growing barley primarily for the brewing sector. Now you're moving into wheat for the baking sector. What about the genetics, the seed, the assessment of those crops for nutritional value or for performance? Is that a challenge?
Yeah, I think that's really exciting. That's an exciting challenge, and I've been talking to Dr. Jones a lot about different varieties. Historically, we've been getting our varieties from the beer industry. They tell us, what they want for their characteristics. It yields well, it grows well, and that's worked really well for us. So now moving into more of a value-added operation, we get to diversify a little bit, but we need to focus on varieties that will yield well, but also we can branch out and kind of mix things up with different flavor and nutritional aspects. And I think that's really something that's exciting for us and exciting for our potential consumers.
So, Steve, what Brett's doing, one of the things I've heard you talk about is the number of flour mills we used to have. What Brett's doing wasn't rare 100 years ago, is my understanding. We had these kind of regional mills. Can you talk a little bit about what we have, what we've lost, and what you see as kind of trends really around the globe, around some of these grain economies? Because you're out traveling all the time, supporting people like that.
Right. So about 100 years ago, we lost 25,000 flour mills in this country in one generation. 25,000 communities lost their mill. They lost a lot of other things during that time, but 25,000. Today, there's 183 in this country, run basically by 3 groups. So we went from 25,000 to 183. What we lost there were not just the jobs and the fact that we had mills in those communities, but we lost an impact on our regional food systems, right? What was grown and how. It was a massive, it was during the time of massive expansion of extractive economy and agriculture. A claw would go into an area, take something out, take out the wheat, take it somewhere else, mill it, bring it back and sell it back to the very people that grew it at an advanced price, right? So what we're interested in is keeping value where it's produced within a region. So we heard a few times the notion of local being sort of co-opted. We've tried very hard to never use the word local. We talk about regional, we talk about keeping value where it's actually produced. If we grow wheat in a valley like ours, we now mill it there. There's a mill that'll do 2 million pounds a year. We grow barley, we malt it there. There's a malt house that has that $30 million put into it. We grow the malt, we brew it there. Within a 3-minute walk of my laboratory, there's a malt house that's had $30 million put into it. There's a brewery that does 10,000 barrels. There's a brewery academy by the local community college that teaches 16 brewers at a time how to brew. There's a flour mill doing 2 million pounds. King Arthur has a baking school that had 1,000 people go through it last year. You add that to the bread lab where we train PhD students and do community outreach. We do bakes in libraries and transition housing and things like that. We're at the Port of Skagit. We have a public-private relationship there. The director of the Port of Skagit, Patsy Martin, says we've added 200 living wage jobs to that community. Within a 4-minute walk from my laboratory, we've added 200 living wage jobs. Living wage is a very important aspect of what we do and what we're all about there. The future that Matthew's saying, what we envision is to bring a price point down that makes good food more accessible to more members of our community. So we're not interested, we can do $16 rustic cool loaves of bread that you'd see in a very urban setting. And if you talk to some of these bakers, you say, how can people afford $16 for a loaf of bread? Say, well, we'll cut it in half and sell it for $8. Okay, geez, that's brilliant, right? So we think as breeders, we want to bring price points down in a meaningful way. We don't do GMO, we do traditional breeding, but we think yield is important. Make it work for the farmer first, find the best use after that. Is Brett milling in a certain way or whatever? Bring the price point down. We're incredibly interested in accessibility, affordability, and approachability of the foods that we do. The foods that we work on, how approachable are they? Can you look at it and recognize it, right? It's very important to fit into food systems there. So that's what we're seeing is a re-decentralization of our agriculture, is when that claw comes into a community, is just flick it back out and say no thanks, and keep the value where it's produced. We don't have to add value, we have to not let it filter between our fingers. So we also try not to use adding value much. The value's there. Somebody's coming and taking it while we're looking, right? So that's what we see in the future.
Brett, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I know your mom and dad are here, and I got to meet them yesterday. It was great. And they've obviously been farming in the valley for 45 years, as you said, growing commodity barley crops. What do they think about this harebrained scheme of yours?
Well, thanks, Matthew. Honestly, I think initially there might have been a little bit of hesitancy because what my dad had has done, all of his career pretty much, has worked really well. And I think he actually has a very good relationship with Coors, especially. They've done a lot of really cool sustainable projects, water savings projects and repairing and restoration projects on our land. So they've been great partners, and it's been lucrative. And so I think initially he kind of was going, what are you talking about? This weird hippie idea? No. But slowly, he did. I think they've definitely come around, so much so that it can't be built fast enough. He's like, come on, why isn't it up yet? Let's get going. Come on, Brett. So it was a little bit of a progression, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not sure if they would agree with that.
I think there's some
affirmation.
So, the three of us have known each other for a while. We spent quite a bit of time together the last 24 hours, and one of the things that have come up is we've talked a little bit about people's fear of grain. We've talked about the book Wheat Belly, which tried to scare people away from grain. People talk about grain as having anti-nutritional properties. There's a lot of fear around gluten. Steve says, he claims, don't fear the gluten, is one of his taglines. But let's talk about that a little bit. What can we do to get people to realize that grain cereals not only make great sense in terms of rotational thinking for farmers, for soil and disease, and use very, very little water, by the way, compared to other protein, carbohydrate sources, but that they're also an important part of our diet. What do you do in your work, Steve? How do you bring people around who have this kind of rigid mythology around grains?
So I don't do anything actually. So if you don't eat gluten and feel better, I think it's great. Okay, I'll just say that first of all. I would encourage you, whether you're gluten intolerant and we're not talking celiac, just talking gluten tolerant, is never eat bleached flour. First of all, you bleach flour with benzoyl peroxide. Okay, that's legal. That's an accurate appointment. I wouldn't eat white flour, right? I eat the whole grain. If you look at the amount of gluten in a wheat kernel, you take away that 30%, there's no gluten in what's taken away, so you supercharge the gluten right there. There's just a lot of things. You can go to our website, there's a brown chalkboard with a bunch of graffiti on it. Click on that, and there are several essays that we've written on gluten and things.
But I want to jump in. You said something yesterday that I want you to speak to this group here. You said that one of the lost ingredients, so you look at an ingredient package of most bread in the store, and there's 20-some ingredients in packaged bread in the store. Steve's, the bread that his bakers and others are working with, there's 3 or 4 ingredients. But he said there's an ingredient that's really important, and that is the ingredient of time. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So first of all, I'd say, just back to not feeling well by eating the food that we eat. If you eat plastic wrapped bread and it's brown bread in the store, it probably has 25 or 26 ingredients in it. Okay, bread has 4 if you count the starter yeast. So that's a start, right? Is maybe lose those 20 ingredients or 22. And Matthew made a really important point there. Is we say add time back into our food first of all. and add time back into our lives, you'll feel better. On the second one, on the first one, you'll feel better too, because time is an important ingredient, certainly in bread, to go through a fermentation, right? If you eat plastic wrap bread, it goes from dry flour to sliced and cooled in that wrapper in a little over 2 hours. Okay, that ain't bread, I'm sorry, that's not bread. It looks like it, it's squishy, it's whipped into a frenzy, and it's made this product, which is American cheese, which is American bread the same way American cheese is processed cheese, right? It's a very similar product. So it looks like it, but it's not. We have an essay in Huffington Post arguing that, exactly. Time is critical because time breaks down the gluten. It makes amino acids more available. It breaks down the phytic acid. It makes the iron and zinc more available. It takes flavors come out. It's easier to digest. We soak our beans. We cook our beans. We do all these things traditionally in our foods, and time is a really important ingredient. So I think if you want to feel better eating bread, eat whole wheat, add more water to it. It's not that, you can make really good whole wheat bread products. There's no mystery to it. You can. Don't make recipes out of the 70s or 80s, right? If you make bread, don't use those bread books. They're horrible, right? Honestly. Just add more water to it and add time to it. You'll feel better for sure. Do 100% whole wheat. Use fresh milled regional grains as well. These mills are popping up everywhere in the country and around the world for very good reason. So, does that work?
So Brett, I want to leave some time for questions, but one final question for you before we try to get a couple from the audience. What do you, as an entrepreneur working in this community, what do you need from the public? Not just the public here, but public policy, public as investors. Like, what can we do to make the pathway for entrepreneurs like you more smooth into the future?
Well, that's a tough one because I'm still in the early stages. So it took a while to find my business partners. So that was one hurdle that I think a lot of entrepreneurs will come across. Getting the capital, like Sam mentioned. Then getting through the permitting, and we talked about a little bit yesterday, having some type of resource or advisor at the county level or at the state level that actually helps people get through the process, I think would be a huge asset. And I think one of my biggest hurdles going forward is going to be distribution, because I am going to be more of a mid-scale rather than sort of the boutique-y, smaller artisan type processing facility. It's more economical, to be totally fair, and it makes it more accessible to, I think, more people. So that is motivating to me. But with that becomes this distribution concern. I think you guys were talking about, Steve was talking about the malt house and the milling facility, all this incredible processing opportunity, right, in Skagit. There's a huge population base there, but not the vast farmland that we have in southern Idaho. We have this vast farmland, but we don't have the population base. So therefore, it's just kind of an interesting conundrum, and so anyway, a long way of saying distribution, I think, will be our big concern.
Thank you. So I don't know if we actually do have time for questions, but I will end by saying this, that farmers are the original entrepreneurs and the original innovators. They have it built into their actual DNA. And that's what to be successful, that's what you have to do as a farmer as markets change. What we are doing in our country right now, in the agricultural crisis we're currently in, is getting ready to put a Band-Aid on the problems, a $12 billion Band-Aid, instead of allowing and investing in rural and regional value-added markets for producers that could keep us out of this commodity nightmare that we're currently in the international market. So all of us as stakeholders, we all are all investors in our agricultural economy. It's our $12 billion in taxes and our children's, maybe grandchildren's, paying that debt off, that are making these investments in agricultural economics. And we do need to have a voice. Policy is also glacially slow work, but we do need to have a strong voice in advocating for rural development, economic investments with our tax dollars that actually make sense and support this kind of work. So thank you guys.